Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin'. Today we're talking topwater. Everything from poppers to wake baits. Let's go. Topwater season is upon us. There's bass up in shallow cover all over the country, and topwater is an amazing way to target those fish. What I've done today is I've grabbed a handful of my favorite topwater baits, 5 categories of topwater, and I want to walk you guys through when each of those work and how I use them effectively. But then just for fun, I grabbed another 5 oddball baits, baits that people are overlooking, baits that people might think are a joke, and they're not. These are 5 overlooked baits that are completely legitimate, that will help you catch fish, and people are missing the ball on them. We'll wrap it up with those. To kick it off, let's talk about those main core baits and how to apply them to your fishing. I sat down, I looked at my topwater boxes, I opened up my topwater boxes, and I just thought, what are my core baits? And in order of importance, I picked 5 categories, because this time of year, topwater is a major deal. And it's not just now. I mean, from now all the way to late fall, topwater is a player in different situations. The first category, if I can only have one topwater, it's going to be some kind of a walking bait. You guys know that Tim and I like to develop patterns. What I mean by that is that if I know there's fish on this bank right here, I won't spend the whole day sitting here. A lot of people will. They'll just sit and fish for those fish. If we know they're here, we'll catch them, but then we'll go run 10 other banks that look just like this and see if we can find bigger fish doing the same thing. With that in mind, a walking topwater bait is a bait that covers a ton of water. It has large drawing power to pull fish across distances, and that allows us to cover water really quickly and build patterns effectively. Now, I have 2 very different styles of bait for doing that. The first one here, this is the evergreen shower blows. That's probably the most common topwater bait being thrown today. It has become unbelievably popular in recent years. The particular size that I've really locked in on the last couple of years is this smaller 105 size. I just do so much damage with that bait. It's loud, it's obnoxious, it throws a lot of water, and it catches them. The other one from Megabass is the Giant Dog X. This bait is a little more, well, it's a lot more subtle. Tighter actioned, not as loud, 2 hooks instead of 3, but this bait, my confidence in this bait is so high. This has just become a fish catcher for me. Last year in particular, I just fell in love with this thing. What I've discovered is that I use these 2 baits as a 1-2 punch. So if I've got chop on the water, waves on the water, a lot of boat traffic, that shower blows, or something like it, something really obnoxious, does a great job. But when the water slicks off, like what I have here behind me, where it really gets a mirror on it, nothing touches that Giant Dog X. That bait stands out from all the other baits. It is just such a fish catcher when it gets slick like this. Those fish pound on that thing. So I never leave. I literally have a boat box for topwater, and there's a stack of both of these in that box because I have so much confidence in them. The second most important category to me, these are in order, the second most important category for me and how I like to fish is some kind of a popper. Particularly, I spend most of my time throwing subtle poppers. Not everybody does. Some people like really obnoxious poppers, and I've got one of those for you in a minute. But I tend to fish a popper very subtly. Little pops, little movements. I'll even walk the dog with them, but just super tight action, super subtle. So something like the Pop X by Megabass, from Duo Realis, you've got this popper. smaller profiled quality poppers. There's dozens of poppers on the market. Some work much better than others. I like quality poppers because I find that they walk better. They've got really good hardware on them. I don't have to change it. I mean, half the time when I buy a cheap popper, by the time I've changed the split rings and the hooks and done all the things I'm gonna do to it, I've spent more money anyway. But these are both poppers that I rely heavily on. The popper for me, again, slick water, but it's when I'm not trying to cover water. So if I already know they're on this bank, I already know they're on a point, right? I've already been around some fish. I know they're in a cove. I'll slide in there really quiet and pick it apart with that popper, and you can catch every single fish in there. It's amazing how well that popper works at just picking that water apart. So that walking bait, I'm covering water, I'm searching. The popper, single targets. I think I know where the fish are. I'm throwing right to where I think the fish is, and I'm fishing much more slowly. When the fish are more lethargic, they'll come up and eat that popper more often than a walking bait because it's staying in their strike zone longer. It's just not moving as quickly. All right, the third category. The third one for me is a wake bait. I prioritize a wake bait very high on my list. I throw a wake a lot. No surprise, this is our wake bait. Tim and I designed this with River to Sea a few years ago. That's the Tactical 210 wake. The Tactical wake, we designed this bait. It's quite large, it's an 8-inch bait, and we designed it to catch giants. We wanted a wake bait. There are great wake baits on the market. They do all sorts of things. Some baits track so good on a steady retrieve. They push water really well. Some you can crawl them, but you can't do anything else. There are some that you can walk really hard and be aggressive. We wanted a bait that could do all those things, and I really didn't see why it couldn't be done. So a few years ago, we spent a ton of time on the test tank, designing, out on the water, back on a test tank with Simon at River to Sea, and we built the Tactical wake as a bait that could do all those things. One bait that you can creepy crawl it. I mean, as slow as you want to go, this thing will still have the most subtle swim. Fish just blew up over here. You can get aggressive with it. You can walk it, chop it. It'll walk, pop, pop, pop. Not a walking bait. Obviously it won't do that. It's got a lip on it, but it'll clack, 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 clack. Clack, 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 super loud. So when that chop is on the water, big waves, I mean, big waves rolling, I'll walk that thing, boom, 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 boom. They crush it. Slick water, creepy crawl it. And then that steady wake, it's got that knock, it's got that perfect sound to it. And when you're running this bait, it runs very flat in the water. We did a lot of things with this bait that are different than what's on the market, completely different concepts. I wanted a wake bait with a bill because you can do so much more with it. The issue with the bill traditionally has been hookup ratio. It can block your front hook. Well, if you run that bait flat in the water, so most wake baits sit nose down in the water. If you can get it to run flat, it's not in the way at all. There's a lot of things that we did differently here to build a bait that would help people catch giants. But again, a wake bait, super high on my list. Another one, Bait Sanity. They've got, it's not even a wake bait, it's a glide bait, but I wish I had one with me. I don't even have it in the boat today. I have one, it's in my truck today. Forgot to bring it on the boat. But they've got a glide, and again, I'll link all this stuff in the video description for you. But that bait, it can be fished quickly subsurface like a glide, but you can also walk it like a giant topwater walking bait. Huge, wide walk, but instead of just being on the surface all the time, it'll dive, and then in the corner, it'll pop out of the water. The Bait Sanity Tug, it is such a cool bait, the way it can do that. Just very, very unique. But those large, profiled, big topwater, wake bait style baits, they're a must in your lineup. They work in the day, they work in the night, and they work all the way through the summer. And so many people overlook a wake. They have no idea that they've got giant fish creeping shallow. They have no clue that the bite is even there, and they're just plain missing it. All right, that's the big bait. So we've got our first 3 categories. We've got 2 more, then we'll get to those oddball baits. The 4th category for me is a frog. And it's hard to believe a frog is number 4 on my list, right? That it's that far down, but those other baits are just that important to me. The frog is such a fish catcher. And once we get into that category, I can pick 20 different frogs, right? There's so many good baits. But I narrowed it down to 2. And the 2 might surprise you. The smaller one, that Jackal Kayara, probably no surprise at all. That has become our #1 frog in recent years. It just works in so many situations. It gets bit when other frogs don't. It still has an excellent hookup ratio despite being a small frog. That's a big deal. A lot of small frogs either don't have the right action or their hookup is terrible. And the Kayara is neither of those things. It's a dream. It walks like a champ. You can pop it, you can do so many things with it, and the hookup is 100%. It's such a good frog. The other one that might surprise a lot of people is a scum frog. The scum frog, as I was growing up, the scum frog was like the Walmart frog, right? It was not something that I took seriously. But a few years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, they kind of revamped that brand and they started doing like these printed patterns on them. And I thought it was cool, so I bought a couple. And what I discovered is that they're unbelievably soft. They're the softest frog that I have found. And as a result, hookup ratio is amazing. I have caught some absolute giants on that frog. It walks like a champ, excellent walk, excellent hookup ratio. It's got a big old nasty hook in it. I mean, it's a brutal frog. When you stick them, they are stuck. And it's not the most expensive frog on the shelf. It's a really good bait. But a frog, I mean, a frog speaks for itself, right? Anywhere that you can't throw a walking bait or a popper, I'm throwing a frog. I'm throwing it in the cover, but I'm also throwing it in open water. I will also parallel the outside of stuff where I can throw a walking bait if other people are throwing walking baits. I've been on highland reservoirs with 20 and 30 feet of visibility, and everyone and their brother is throwing a wake bait, a walking bait, a popper, and I'll throw a frog in 40 feet of water out off the ends of points, and we're crushing fish, crushing spotted bass, simply because no one else does it, and it's a topwater, and they eat it. They don't see that profile. So if your fish are pressured, you might think about some odd applications for a frog that can help you out. Now, last but not least is a buzzbait. A buzzbait is another major player, especially as we head into summer. As fish start backing out. So some fish go deep, some fish stay shallow, right? The ones that are shallow, they get into cover. They'll be in cover from now all the way through the bulk of summer until that grass starts dying. But the biggest fish will often pull to the outermost cover. And a buzzbait, much like a walking bait, is a bait that I can use to cover an insane amount of water. I mean, I can drop a trolling motor and go for miles on a grass line with a buzzbait, and that is very valuable to me. 2 styles of buzzbait that could not be more different. This right here, this is from Dirty Jigs. This is a skirtless buzzbait. Sure doesn't look like much. This has become my favorite buzzbait in recent years. The reason why, this is a 1/2 ounce, and I personally like the 1/2 ounce because I can just get more distance out of it. I can throw it farther, I can cover more water. But what I do is I take my favorite 4 to 5 inch swim bait, you know, an X-Zone Swammer, a 4/8 Kitech, a River to Sea D-Walker, because it's super durable and will hold up to 30 bites on a buzzbait. You put that on here, so you've got the buzzbait blade on the surface, but below the surface, it's just a swim bait. Fish come unglued for that thing. The other one, this is from D&M, and again, I'm gonna link everything in the video description. This is a quad blade buzzbait, so 4 blades, but it's plastic. Now, this bait comes stock with a clacker on it. And I take a pair of pliers and I cut the clacker off. I'll tell you exactly how I fish my baits. I don't hide it. I'll tell you the truth. I love this bait, the slow roller, but that clacker has to go. This bait, it's just, you can go slower than the other baits. I can still cover tons of water, but on those mornings or those evenings where the fish just aren't quite as aggressive, I can slow it down, and that quad plastic blade will just blop, 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 blop. It just churns water at a much slower speed than other baits. It's a different sound. It's a more subtle sound. Even though it's a large profile, it's a more subtle sound. I crack them on it. And this is not new. I mean, we've been doing this for 15 years with this bait. That quad blade is very cool. But my main buzz bait, more and more and more, is a skirtless buzz. It's a different look. It's a compact profile. It's just a swim bait, but it's a swim bait with all that ruckus, and they blast it. Now, those are my standard topwaters. Those are the baits I rely on day in and day out. And again, in the video description, I'll link all of them for you in the order that I'm talking about, and I'll even give you my favorite colors in every single one of them. We really just want to help you guys fish with confidence. You know it's that topwater time of year. If one of those categories fits how you fish, those are baits that you can rely on. They're very proven. Now, here come 5 more in absolutely no particular order. These are baits, most of these we've talked about. Most of them you've seen us catch fish on. But for one reason or another, they're just not mainstream baits. The general population of anglers is overlooking them, and they're fish catchers. So if one of these fits, I'll kind of describe how and why I throw them and where I throw them. And if that fits your style, that might be a bait you want to check out. The first one right here, the Tackle Blade Waker. Looks more like a chatterbait than a topwater. This is somewhere between a chatterbait and a buzzbait. Okay, so what it is it's essentially a swim jig, single hook, weed guard, and then it's got this chatter type blade on it, except that this is made to stay on the surface. The bait sinks when you throw it out, just like a buzzbait, it wants to sink. So you gotta start right away to get it on top. But it has this way of throwing water, and it's just splashing water as it comes through. Very, very unique. It's essentially a surface chatterbait. They unload on it. I've done so much damage on the Tennessee River with this thing, it's not even funny. I come in behind other people that are throwing other topwaters, and I just pluck fish behind them. If bass are actively chasing bait fish, not if they're lazy and sitting around. If they're up, they're aggressive, they're chasing, whether or not there's grass and junk in the water, it's great for this stuff, but it's great in open water too. Covering water with this thing just gets them. It's just one of those baits that has whatever it is, that magical it factor, the it that makes fish bite, that some baits have it and some baits don't. This just seems to be one of those baits that has it. I am not picky on the swim bait I put on the back. This is a net bait on here, a little spanky. The biggest thing I'll say is that you want a swim bait that doesn't have a ton of action. The more action it has, the more it pulls back and the harder it is for this thing to stay on the surface. So the swim bait's just there for overall profile so that they eat the right part of the bait and they get the hook. I don't actually want tons of action out of that thing. But that Tackle Blade Waker is no joke. Next up, this is the Jackal Piku Piku. This is essentially a wacky rigged topwater. This bait is so good, so good. I throw it in the exact situations that I would throw a popper. So I already think I know where fish are. I'm not trying to cover tons of water. I know they're in this cove. Okay, come into the cove, aim for the targets, okay? This bait converts fish for me that I can't catch on anything else. Seriously. But it is very situational. Again, I am not covering water. I have to believe that I know where the fish are. But what I do with this bait is I throw it out, hold my rod tip high. You can throw it on spinning rod, you can throw it on BFS, you can throw it on a light bait caster, but you're gonna throw it out and you hold your rod tip up and you just shake it. Super subtle. And it'll send out these little vibration waves. The bait just sits there and just shakes on the surface. I was catching fish on it. I was on this awesome bite, throwing this thing on a BFS rod, just whaling fish. But it wasn't until bass came up blowing up on shad, and I saw this injured shad show up a minute later doing this thing on the surface, and it just click, click, click. It all lined up. It looked identical. I mean identical to a dying shad floundering on the surface. It's that super subtle. Again, rod tip up, not down. Rod tip up and just gentle shake it. And it'll just sit there and just send out these vibrations and boom, they blow up on it just like it's a popper. It's a really, really cool bite. All right, next one from Snag Proof. We talked about this last fall. This is the Zoo Pop. This is a soft popper. Half frog, half popper. This needed to be done, and it needed to be done right. So it's got a feathered tail, but there's no hook in there. The hook is a big double hook. Actually, it's a small double hook. It's small, but it's heavy wire. We needed this. We need the ability to throw a true popper action in heavy cover, because they don't always want to bait walking. That's why so many people throw poppin' frogs, but a true popper does it better than a poppin' frog does it. And that thing is absolutely legit. That is a very, very cool bait. Next one from Nomad. This is called the Chug Norris. It's a popper. You'll notice that theme, right? I'm pulling a lot of subtle baits. Well, poppers are really high on my springtime/summertime list. I throw them a lot. This bait is cool because it's a little tiny profile. I mean, it's the size of like a standard popper, but its displacement, the amount of water that it moves, is insane. Like it will out chug a chug bug, but it's small. That's not something that I do every day. Speaking for myself, typically when I throw a popper, it's that super subtle thing. But I've got some friends I fish with that love that aggressive popper fishing, and this one does it extremely well. It's just got that sound. You lay it way out there, sploosh, sploosh. You know, you can still slow down and work it like a popper. You can. You can even get a really subtle walk out of it. Really subtle. Just chugging that nose a little bit. It'll do all those different things, but it's got that bloosh, bloosh, like a traditional chug bug, but in a very different profile, much smaller, and in some super cool colors. If that's your style of fishing, that is a bait you don't want to overlook. And then last but not least is the Z-Man Hellraiser. Again, a bait we've talked about, a bait we've fished. You guys have seen us catch fish on them. But again, I think it's overlooked by the majority of people because it's so crazy looking. Comes in two sizes. This is the bigger one. It also comes in a smaller size. This is a very unique bait. Sinks like a buzz bait. So when you throw this thing out, if you don't start right away, it's going to bottom. So throw it out, start retrieving. It's just a steady retrieve bait, like a buzz bait, like a whopper plopper, but it's its own unique animal. The face of the bait will be doing this on the surface, and it's fast. So I'm doing it slow, like it's walking. That's not what I mean. It's doing this across the surface. And this blade, this weighted blade, is in the back kicking, creating all kinds of vibration. It's completely different than anything else you throw. And they smash on it. Frankly, the closest thing to it in my mind is that Teckle Blade Waker. In terms of actual action that I'm seeing on the surface, these two are within reason, fairly close to one another, but they're achieving it very, very different ways. But this is a fast-moving, aggressive bait that can cover a ton of water, and it gets bit. All right, guys, it is that topwater time of year, and it's going to stay that topwater time of year. You guys want to get out there and throw that stuff. I wanted to give you sort of our core baits and an understanding of when we throw them and why we switch between them. But I also wanted to give you some of those outliers, because if one of those fits a time and a place that you fish, you'll be throwing a bait that no one else is throwing, and that can be a huge deal. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.